Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Kohler Group's webinar series. This is part 2 of 5 webinar sessions on the Hong Kong versus Singapore battle. I'm very pleased to have our guest speaker, Mark Geary, Chief Executive of the AsiaNet Group, joining us today to present on attracting and retaining high-performing talent. Before we begin today's presentation, I would just like to make sure that everybody can hear me. So if all attendees could click the hand button in the control panel, that will allow me to know that the sound system is functioning. Please note that if you do have any technical difficulties through your computer system based on the internet connection, know that you can still connect via audio through a telephone line. As is typical with any of our webinar series, we do have a Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. If you would be so kind as to include your questions and comments into the questions section of the control panel, that will help us to have a comprehensive Q&A session at the end of today's session. For those of you who are not familiar with Kohler Group, please allow me to introduce who we are. Kohler Group is a CSC subsidiary that was established in Asia in 1979. The company is based within 3 jurisdictions in Asia: Hong Kong, Singapore, and China, with 8 offices based in China. What we do is we help foreign investors with their market entry and expansion into the Asian region, providing services such as pre-investment advisory, incorporation, tax, accounting, and HR services. One of our unique advantages is that we do have international desks that speak over 10 languages and are able to cater to our clients' needs in their own mother tongue. A little bit about myself. My name is Christina Kohler-Coluccia. I'm a director at Kohler Group, and I will be the moderator for today's session. I've been working for Kohler Group since 2003, when I moved to Shanghai to open our very first China office. Since that date, I've been helping foreign investors from all around the world with their market entry strategies as well as expansion strategies, not only in China, but Hong Kong and Singapore as well. I'm co-author of our China Invest.biz magazine, which highlights all the latest trends and issues that are arising within the 3 jurisdictions that we operate in. And if you're interested in subscribing to it, it is free of charge and can be easily done so on our homepage on our website. So, without further ado, I would like to give the microphone to Mark, and Mark will begin by introducing his company, himself, and will begin the presentation. Mark?
Thank you, Christina, and good morning, everybody. Just a few words about the AsiaNet Group. It consists of 3 main businesses. The original business, which was AsiaNet Consultants, that started in 1988, and it's fairly straightforward, retained executive search firm. It operates in the Asia-Pacific region and globally. We're basically recruiting at the senior end of the talent pool, and for fashion and apparel, engineering, manufacturing, supply chain, medical devices, and advanced materials. A second company is called TRIG. It stands for Talent Research and Information Group, and 3 basic things that TRIG does. One is talent mapping, which will deliver a full competitor analysis of people and organizations, and basically to build talent pools of specialist staff. It also carries out market intelligence so that we can look into organizations and markets about your competitors and how they operate. And the final thing they do is, because of the team that we've got here of 12 people in TRIG, we do project recruitment, particularly for companies that have got a peak that they can't handle themselves, and they need help, so we step in and do that. The third company is a very interesting one. You might call it a new age company. It's called BSD. BSD means Beyond Skin Deep, but it's a cutting-edge code and digital technology academy, which is focused on providing digital strategy and education for senior management, and particularly also for those that really want to learn about these game-changing subjects. And this will feature quite a bit during the presentation. Next slide, please. About myself, I've been involved in recruitment for senior executives for over 30 years. I previously sort of worked on the other side of the fence with some fairly big companies, Intercontinental Hotels, ICI of the big chemicals group, and the Inchcape group. I've lived and worked in this part of the world for 28 years, so as having started in the UK, I spent the last 28 years living in Taiwan, and then Malaysia, and then Hong Kong. The company that AsiaNet, I bought actually in the year 2000 when it was just a Hong Kong company, then took it into China, opened offices in Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou and Wuhan. And we have about 20 staff in Hong Kong and 25 staff in China. I also founded in 2002 the International Executive Search Federation, so that we had a good global network, which is one was purely for the privately owned companies in the search business, and the ISF has got 80 offices in 25 countries. Next slide, please. So today our subject is attracting and retaining high-performing talent, and in particular the need for a much more imaginative talent management strategy. Now today we are firmly in the digital technology era. So from a talent attraction perspective, we need a talent pipeline that reflects the rapid changes and the demands of this digital technology era, because this is something which touches onto everything now that a firm does. Now this challenge is not one that is just Hong Kong and Singapore. I think this is one that covers USA, UK and EU. But it does offer an advantage for Hong Kong and Singapore to get into a market leadership situation if they can really get hold of the digital technology era, and they can make terrific inroads into that. Next slide, please. Talent walking out of the door. This is one of the really big issues at the moment, because in this digital world, switching jobs has become easier than ever. We've got workspace, which is replacing offices. We've got Starbucks, which has become a meeting place. So top performers are increasingly in demand, and employees have become more and more mobile. And they're quite relaxed about changing jobs every 2 to 3 years. So companies now face increased turnover, which is expensive and disruptive. And the risk is strategic capabilities, your intellectual property and leadership skill walking out the door unless you really are looking after them and maintaining them. And the impact of digital technology, this is leaving many employees feeling vulnerable, especially at senior levels. Why at senior levels? Because many of the senior management are in denial and still living in the world of paper, reports and committees. Next slide, please. So let's take a little look at today's and tomorrow's world. What was a chief information officer is now becoming a chief technology officer. We've got B2B, B2C, C2C, and the last mile, which is now being covered by drones. Code. Now this is the really big thing, and I'll say a bit more about that later, but EDI, cloud, and big data. We're going to see business innovation, which is going to be formatted in code. That's things like Objective-C, JavaScript, and Python. Those are words that you're going to increasingly hear about. All of this is increasing the complexity, and it's outpacing the skill set of the traditional manager. The big problem that we're all facing is that the education system is not coping, because code is not taught in schools. It's not in the curriculum. Next slide, please. So, EDI, electronic data interface. Companies that haven't used a formal process in the past will find it harder to exist without using EDI, and they will need people that can work with this. The cloud transition continues at a very fast pace. Costs, or reduction in costs, is going to be a huge driver to the cloud for those organizations running legacy applications. And the challenges of infrastructure, maintenance, and labor cost will necessitate the transition to the cloud. And also, as that happens, you're going to see a tremendous opportunity to reduce labor. If you look simply at Amazon, I'm sure all of you will be familiar with Amazon. Their end-to-end process doesn't rely on paper. So ask yourself the question, why is your company not using that same system? Because that's where you've got to get to, and your competitors will get there first if you're not doing something about it. So from that, mobile will dominate. We see how it dominates now the retail trade. So whatever the function or the role, you will have to put money into supporting the total mobile experience for employees. If you don't, they will go to more enlightened employers. And some of the so-called less educated staff, well, less educated, maybe they don't have degrees, but they're coming up through the digital era. They are often more tech savvy than their bosses. Next slide. So let's look at why do employees leave. The following pointers are global. These are the same top 5. There might be a slightly different order, but the same top 5 in the USA, Europe, and Asia Pac. And the number one of all is how I am treated by my boss. Number 2 is nearly always lack of career development and progression. 3, 4, and 5 tend to move around a bit depending on the part of the world, but they're still the same ones. Company culture, lack of recognition, not having the right tools to do the job, and that's going to be increasingly frustrating for those companies that are not embracing the digital era. And reward, pay and bonus. Now, reward, pay and bonus, if you're getting things right, then it's less of an issue. But when you've got 1, 2, and 3 are becoming areas of negatives rather than positives, then the only reason people are going to come to work is pay and bonus. Next slide, please. Now, people brand and product brand. Now, you may find it difficult seeing people brand, and that's quite deliberate. So ask yourself, how many millions will your company spend on your product brand image? And how many scarce dollars will you spend on the employee value proposition? Now, companies spend millions to attract customers, but in reality, they spend very little to attract and retain talent. So, in your company, do you carry out an employee climate survey each year? Now, companies regularly carry out customer surveys, but why aren't they doing that for employees? So, the next question that follows from that is the staff satisfaction percentage a KPI? If it's not, why not? Because it's is as important as sales. Next slide, please. Just to recap what really an employee value proposition is about, it's not just pay and benefits, but it's career, advancement, personal growth. The nature of the work, does it provide a challenge, an autonomy, an affiliation, particularly culture and the work environment? Next slide, please. So, attracting and retaining high-performance talent will become more and more difficult unless you have a much more imaginative strategy. Now, let's start with certain bits of basics. Talent acquisition manager or talent manager is not just another word for recruitment. Sad to say, some companies have just merely changed the job titles. Therefore, they're likely still to have problems. Talent management is really talent acquisition combined with succession planning and combined with career development. Benchmarking and talent pools are an essential part of that. And I will refer to a case study in a few minutes to highlight how one major company has tackled this. There's also a need to reduce bureaucracy and complexity in this talent management process. It's important as well to remember talent exists at all levels, either vertically or horizontally. It's not just something that happens at the top, and I think too many companies make that mistake, and I'll refer to this again in a minute. And as well as having a talent acquisition strategy, when you've got them, you need an effective retention strategy to make sure these people do not walk out of the door. Next slide, please. So, succession planning, this is part one. Too often, this has been focused on fast-track progression to the top, but there is potential at every level. Let's look at what happens in practice in many companies. If you're still on the paperwork system, a 2-inch thick pile of forms will arrive from human resources. There'll be lots of profiles to understand, so you can assess your high flyers, and then you'll be grouping them as A1, A2, A3, B1, B2, B3. This is why line managers don't like human resources, because they just look at this as a great big administrative chore. And if you're asked to do it online, okay, so to keep HR happy, you put the successor's name in every box. That's just not realistic, and it's not at all helpful. And of course, you then wonder, having done all of that, what happens to it? In reality, in many companies, not a lot. They've done it, it's a bit like a compliance thing, it's put in a file, and then nothing happens until next year when it's done again. Next slide, please. So, succession planning part 2. we can make it easier and more effective. You don't need forms or definitions. Actually, common sense can prevail. If you look at your organization, you only have 3 types of staff, and this applies at every level. Those who are mission critical, those who are core, I'm afraid the rest are nice to have. And if you've got really difficult market situations, you've got to need to make changes. If you've done this evaluation of your staff into these 3 areas, you know straight away where you're going to have to make your cuts. It'll be in the nice to have. And hopefully you'll have developed strategy to ensure that your mission critical and core are kept on board. So if you evaluate your staff in this way, you can then focus your succession planning and career development at all of these levels. And remember also, not everybody wants promotion. Some people have got tremendous family obligations and they want to be recognized, have a motivational job, but they don't necessarily want to have to work long hours, travel a lot, or be pushed into a senior role. But some of those people could well be mission critical to your organization. And when you look at your salary reviews, then you can do your salary reviews in a much more effective way, because it is important that if you've only got a budget of say 4%, that you are allocating much more to your mission critical and core than to the nice to have. Because if your mission critical people aren't getting 10% per annum, they're falling way behind in the market, and these nasty headhunters will come along and take them away from you. Next slide, please. So to the case study, which features the use of benchmarking and talent pools. This is a real live case study that we've worked on with a client. We did this for, it's a US, but it's a global automotive components manufacturer. It's got over 100 factories worldwide, because it has to have component factories right alongside every automotive or truck or tractor factory that's in the industry. They did their 3-year business plan, and they were looking at the succession for general managers. They knew that they had got quite a bulge coming up of retirements, but also their internal succession, there were gaps because they'd done their succession planning correctly. So they asked us to build a talent pool for them to identify general managers who could run these factories around the world. Having got that, they then benchmarked these candidates, looking at their detailed profiles and comparing them with the internal, and they could compare the external resources with the internal and the internal with the external. And not surprisingly, they saw that some of the external candidates had got greater levels of achievement and experience and would be able to fill their talent needs over the next 3 years. Now, here's the imaginative part. They then started to reach out externally. We provided them with the contact details, so they started mailing information about their company, sending some technical information, which is nothing unusual. Technical people, managers are always getting information, so that didn't cause any surprises. And also they invited them to seminars and meetings which they were holding or present at in different parts of the world. And then what they arranged was representatives of their own company would be there, but they knew the people to look out for. So over the 1-2 years, they made a point of getting to know, shaking hands, talking to these people to get to know them a bit better. So then they had constructed the external succession plan. Now, that is, I think, one of the most imaginative ways that I've ever seen for any company that has really embraced the succession planning and made that an essential part of attracting and retaining their staff. Next slide, please. I'd like to, as I conclude, highlight the words of Jeff Immelt. Many of you may know him. He's the chairman and CEO of General Electric. And he said this only in August of this year. I'll pause to read through it because it's such an important message that he's given. He said that until recently, our management could make every decision in the headquarters. Those days are over. We have to embrace decentralization and use technology to help our people to stay connected and allow more automated decision making. So you can look at an app and see what's going on inside the company. But culture is not just apps. It's a combination of people and technology. So if you're joining the company in your 20s, you're going to learn to code. It doesn't matter whether you're in sales, finance, or operations. You may not end up being a programmer, but you will know how to code. We are changing the plumbing inside the company to connect everyone and make the culture change possible. This is existential, which I think just means going to the core. We are committed to this. So this is one of the most powerful statements I've heard. And anybody that knows anything about GE, it will happen. So, to sum up before we go to questions, today we've looked at the implications of the digital technology era and its impact on organizations, jobs, and the talent shortage. We've seen that this isn't just a Hong Kong or Singapore thing, it's a global thing. We've seen that talent management affects all levels, not just top management. We've looked at why talent is walking out of the door and the need to have an employee value proposition. We've seen that an imaginative approach needs to be developed if companies are going to attract and retain high potential staff at all levels. Thank you. Now open for questions.
Mark, thank you very much for your time and for the presentation. We do have a series of questions that have come in. So I'm going to put them in the order that they came in along your presentation so that I guess it will flow then through the presentation that you made, and then we can sum it up at the end. You mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that basically the fact that there's this digital age that is now rolling through. The question from the attendee is, do you feel that this is therefore changing the definition of what a manager is and what a manager should be?
Most definitely. It's moving at a very rapid pace, but you're looking at a very decentralized form of management, getting away from committees, working parties. You're going to have a much more sort of decentralized management. That means a lot more trust. The company will develop its overarching strategy, but it's going to be implemented, down the line in Russia, in China, in Indonesia, in Singapore, in India. You can't micromanage that from a headquarters. So the nature of jobs, I think, will change. And I think this is what's got to be supported by having the cloud and extracting all of the big data to be lots of information, but it's going to be readily available on your smartphone. You can see what's happening wherever you are. And the same way that you order something from Amazon, you get a confirmation within a few hours, and then the next day you're told that DHL Express will be delivering it to your office on Friday afternoon in 5 days' time. So yes, jobs are going to have to be redefined, and they are being redefined rapidly now.
So with the clients that you help, whether it be in Hong Kong, China, or the rest of Asia, how do you feel that these pockets of entities are changing in terms of staff and managers? I mean, I get the impression from you that they're becoming much more independent versus dependent on the headquarters.
Yeah, I think the Asia Pacific region is, it's a very diverse region. It's not sort of as compact and a sort of, let's say, so monocultural as, say, Germany or France, where you can travel quite quickly from one place to another. We've grown up with that in Asia Pacific. So we've been much more used to taking a regionalized approach, whereas other countries, it's been much more tightly controlled. But Europe has to think pan-European. But in many companies now, you've got to manage globally. You've got to put the organization, in the territories. And I distinguish the word globalization from internationalization, because international was still managing an international business, but from a New York or London headquarters. We even see Japanese companies now that have moved their international operations completely outside of Japan. Infinity, they set up the headquarters of the Nissan did. The headquarters of the Infinity business was placed in Hong Kong, and that was a major step forward. So yes, it's going to happen.
And in reality, what do you see on the ground in terms of employees that are being hired by Western businesses? Is it localized? Are there still expatriates that are being relocated? Is it a mixed culture? Is it a melting pot? What are the tendencies that you see when you're coming into this region?
I'm seeing now more Asian managers. We've got this tremendous amount of Asian talent now that's worked in international firms, that have maybe worked overseas. I think we've seeing a big change in China. Expatriates are very expensive. Very few actually speak Putonghua. And as Asian managers have just through travel have become much more enlightened, but they've been on company management courses, they've spent time in Australia or the US, even you might call it the immigration crisis from 1997 in Hong Kong. There were so many Hong Kong Chinese that went overseas. Then they either studied or they got jobs, particularly in Canada, in Australia, on the west coast of the USA, and they've come back. and many of those now are in senior positions in China. And we've seen, Singaporeans as well. They've also travelled. So we have in China now a very strong cadre of, I would say, international Asian managers. Regularly, we've seen that from recruitment companies. Sort of either want international mainland Chinese, Hong Kong, Malaysian, or Singaporeans. So and increasingly, that is the trend that we're seeing at the moment.
And because one part of your presentation was about how do you build your brand, your company brand, to employees as well as future employees. One of the questions that came in was, well, yes, we're trying to attract the consumers, but do the Asians ultimately know our Western brands? I mean, how do you educate them on why they should work for us? Is it a different system in terms of education and persuasion versus in the West?
I think it's a very competitive market now. To find the truly internationally experienced manager that's got the right skills to be able to multitask over multi countries, and you've got to make your company attractive. If you try to think you can run a company without these senior people, you're just not going to do it. If you've not got the talent, you're not going to make the numbers. So companies have got to use the same tactics that they've used to present their product. The people are as important as the product. You're never going to get it to market. You're never going to make it if you've got an empty factory or you're short of sales and marketing people. So that I ask companies, why is your strategy so lopsided that you will spend all this money, you understand what you've got to do for product, why don't you get it for people? And I think this is a major shortcoming in management that we've had for years. But I think the digital era is going to magnify that all the more, because the kids know more than the parents who are running the companies.
Mark, I have a follow-up question from the previous question that we had just spoken about in relation to who are actually the managers now located in Asia. The question that's come in is, what is the work ethic of these Asian managers compared to the Westerners? I think this is more of a trust question more than anything else.
Yeah, I'm biased. I've worked here a long time. I think the Asian work ethic is absolutely tremendous. I'm not saying people elsewhere don't go for the extra mile, but it's a different sort of approach. You've got work-life balance issues in Europe, and I have to respect those. But so people like to get away, at 5 o'clock. But then you wonder why Europe has got so many issues about low productivity and high costs. So let's take the Asia Pacific region. Here, that people do work longer hours. I'm not saying whether that's good or bad, but they do whatever they've got to do to make it happen. And they put themselves what you call second. They put, obviously, their family comes first, but their loyalty to their company is enormous, because they look at it, they are putting bread on my table. So I think the Asian work ethic is remarkable, and it continues to be so. I'm pleased to see that some of the hours are not as long. But again, technology has enabled people to take their phones home and to make calls that they need to from home, and so they can communicate, and that they do from home rather than staying in the office long hours. So I'm not saying, I say that I'm not going to be too critical of the US and Europe, but I think I do believe there is a much stronger work ethic in Asia Pacific.
You were talking about the case study in relation to the automotive client that you were talking about, and the strategy that they had in terms of creating and formulating and fostering a talent pool in case they needed it. The question that's come in is, it's great to be able to spend time on developing this talent pool, but obviously if you're a small, medium-sized company, you may not have the resources to be able to do that. And the fear of this attendee is, what happens to poaching? If you've created this talent pool and then you have competitors that are coming in that are poaching this talent, what do you have left over actually in the end of the day? Does poaching exist in Asia? Who are companies are poaching? What is that philosophy like in Asia?
Okay, let me take that in two parts. If you don't do the business planning, then you're really going to get caught out. So you do a business plan, you do a product plan, you do a materials plan. So, whether you're small or medium, you still need to do all of that around product. So why aren't you doing it about your people? You should be anticipating a certain amount over a 3-year period of wastage, people that will leave. You can then think, what do I need to do to retain them? But you can anticipate those problems. Some you can see definitely. We will need to move person X, and we'll need to develop person Y, because if we don't, they'll go somewhere else, and that company will develop them. So you can anticipate that. So people plan should be right alongside product plan and resources plan, and it doesn't need to be big and elaborate. The big companies have the elaborate plans. A smaller company, you can be doing it on just sort of one piece of paper. You may only need to sit and talk to just 2 or 3 of your colleagues, but you sit and you do that and anticipate. Then you can look at how you develop your internal staff, or to think, okay, in a year's time we need to make a strategic recruitment to bring somebody in, so we've got a successor ready. So it can be done.
And the last question that I personally have, just out of my own curiosity, because I'm interested to know how this concept is developing in Asia. In Europe and in the US, it's very common to have employees based from home. And in that way, you have a smaller office space, and you're giving basically work flexibility to your employees to work from home and to fulfill their job requirements from home. And as you said, with the digital technology, this is what is actually making it possible to do. In the US, this is becoming quite a new trend, particularly with the large companies from Silicon Valley, where they're saying, okay, we're going to have smaller office spaces and people can work from home at their own pace and time. What is this? Is this concept developing now in Asia, that people are having smaller offices and are now moving into this, like you said, this digital era where people are working now from home, and there's no longer this cohesiveness of an actual company culture and feeling?
I think there are changes. I think one is just a sort of the problem of working from home is it's not as easy in Asia Pac. Many people have got smaller homes. You've got the family unit together, so it's not just parents and child. You may have elderly parents, the grandparents there as well, and the size and the situation of many people's homes are not at all conducive to working. But having said that, what we are seeing is a tremendous amount of development of workspace, which you can just go in, and this is sort of what you call commercially available. You only need to pay a small fee, but you can have that membership, so you can go in to that place and work. You find the space. I've seen, particularly in the last, I think, 3 years or so, more companies that have, as they've moved offices, or let me say moved office, they've dispensed with offices. They're creating a much more open environment with very attractive styling, where there's desks, there's pods, where the senior management team are also in just sort of open offices, and that is an increasing trend, because people are out. People in Asia Pac do have to travel a lot, long distances. We travel a lot by plane. It's not like in the US where you travel by car. So I think there's more and more of this taking place. And of course that enables people to, interact better, with each other. So that is a definite trend that is taking place. It hasn't turned into a tidal wave yet, but it's moving in that direction, and particularly the younger generation, they like to work in that way.
Great, Mark. So just as you were speaking, there was another question that came in that I think we shouldn't miss out on, because it reflects on your slide about why employees leave. The question relates to, I'm going to read it off the screen. We're a small, medium-sized company. We have opened up an office in Hong Kong. We have a team of 4 people. How can it be expected of us to create, with just a team of 4 people, a career development plan, and also to promote company culture when actually the head office is based in Europe, and you have a 6-7 hour time zone difference, and we're not prepared due to cost to have people travel to Europe? How do you still try to maintain those employees in such a small office environment, but still keep them, and without this whole career development plan because we're new, and without the corporate culture that we can't really bring over from Europe?
Okay, I understand that it's not easy, but I'm very much a small company myself. Although we've got a few more people now, we've only got sort of like 20 here, but there was many. We've got other offices where there's only sort of like 5 people, but it is having very much that open environment. If you've got 4 or 5 people, and then people are, if the boss is just sat in an office locked away, then it's not going to be necessarily good for the culture. We've always called our company here the Asianet family, and our staff really do believe that. They say to me that it is like being a family here, because they know each other, they socialize, we allow them to have as much holiday as they want. We don't have a holiday allowance. They don't have to then, make up stories. If grandma's got to be taken to the hospital, then it's great. And when they come back, I ask them, say, yeah, how's your grandmother? So they come back when they need to. So there are little things that you can do to create your Asian version of the culture, and it is around inclusion. You, in a small company, very often you need to have cover. So one of the things you can do is to make sure that they do understand each other's jobs. If somebody's away, somebody else can cover for them and do things. It's very much the character and the leadership of the boss. But I would say if you've got 4, 5, 6 people, think of the concept of the family and make it like a nice sort of family atmosphere. And I think that'll work.
All right, Mark. Well, let's leave it there. Thanks a lot for all your responsiveness in terms of the questions that have come in. For those of you that are too shy to ask questions or would like to speak to Mark directly, then please, by all means, take a look. His contact information is here. We will be distributing the presentation at the end, so you will have this slide available to you. No need to rush and write everything down. And Mark would be happy to answer all of your questions. If you would like to have an introduction made, then please don't hesitate to contact me, and I'd be happy to introduce you directly to Mark as well. So Mark, thank you very much for your time and for presenting and going along with the Q&A this afternoon. Thanks very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
For the rest of you, if you haven't subscribed or registered yet for the 3 remaining webinar sessions, tomorrow's is in relation to Singapore as a gateway to the ASEAN region. We have supply chain strategies on Thursday, and we're very much looking forward to the Battle of the Asian Jurisdictions, Hong Kong versus Singapore, on Friday. So if you did enjoy today's webinar session, please do register for the remaining 3 that are up and coming in the remainder of the week. If you are interested in learning more about Kohler Group, we publish extensive information about the 3 jurisdictions that we operate in. It's all free of charge and can be easily found on our YouTube channel, LinkedIn page, as well as on our website. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Thank you and goodbye.